The ring on Celeste Hawthorne's finger threw sharp sparks of light every time she moved her hand. 5 carats of flawless diamond. An announcement more than a promise. It said alliance. It said legacy. It said power. It said everything except love. Adrian Vale walked beside her through Central Park, matching her pace, nodding at the right moments while she spoke about venues and menus and guest lists. Celeste talked like this wedding was a crown she'd waited her whole life to wear. Adrian heard only fragments, like a radio playing in another room. His eyes drifted over the park. Families on blankets, children chasing bubbles, couples leaning into each other like the world was soft, ordinary people living ordinary lives. The kind of life Adrian had never been allowed to want. And then his entire body went still. Across the path, pushing a stroller built for 3, was a woman he knew the shape of in his bones. Mara Quinn. 4 years hadn't erased her. It had only sharpened her into something leaner and quieter. Dark brown hair pulled back like she'd done it in a hurry. A faded t-shirt with a food truck logo stretched across her chest. Her skin looked paler than he remembered, and her shoulders carried exhaustion like a coat she couldn't take off. Adrian's heart hit so hard it was painful. He didn't breathe until he saw the stroller. 3 seats. 3 small heads. 3 toddlers, about 3 years old. Old enough to speak, old enough to remember, old enough to have lived entire lives without him. One of them, a little girl, lifted her face toward a bird perched above the path. The light caught her eyes. Cold grey. Adrian's grey. It was like looking into a mirror that didn't belong to him. A noise pressed against the inside of his skull. His pulse thundered. His vision narrowed until the entire park became only Mara, the stroller, and the 3 children. Mara's gaze snapped up as if she felt him staring. Her green eyes found him across the distance, and widened. Colour drained from her face so fast she looked sick. In the space of a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. 4 years of silence stretched tight between them like wire. Then Mara's hands clenched around the stroller handle, and she ran. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. She shoved the stroller with desperate strength, weaving between people, cutting behind trees, disappearing into the park like she could outrun a ghost. Adrian remained frozen, the world still moving around him, while his own stopped. Beside him, Celeste kept talking. Flowers, invitations, the photographer her mother insisted on, but her voice didn't reach him. There was only one thought in Adrian's mind, loud as a bell. 3 children. His eyes. 3 years old. His children. 20 minutes later, Adrian sat in the back of a black Bentley with his phone pressed to his ear so hard it hurt. Damon Rourke, his right hand for 8 years, answered on the first ring. "Find everything on Mara Quinn," Adrian said. His voice sounded like steel, but something beneath it shook. "Where she lives, where she works. Money, debts, everything." A pause. "And Damon, she has 3 children. I need everything about them too." Silence, just long enough to tell Adrian that even Damon was stunned, but Damon didn't ask questions. That was why he'd survived so long beside Adrian. "I'll have it within 2 hours, Damon said. Those 2 hours dragged like punishment. Adrian sat in his private office, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. He didn't sip, didn't move. His eyes fixed on the wall as if staring hard enough could summon the truth into the room. When the phone buzzed, he answered before the first ring finished. Damon's voice came low and steady. "Mara Quinn, 27, owns a small food truck, Quinn's Kitchen, in Brooklyn, lives in a 1-bedroom in mid-city with 3 children." Adrian's grip tightened. The children are Lila, Theo, and Owen Quinn. 3 years and 2 months old. No father listed on any birth certificate. Adrian closed his eyes. 3 years and 2 months. The timeline clicked into place with brutal precision. Mara had been pregnant when he'd destroyed her, with words meant to save her life. "What about money?" Adrian asked, though part of him didn't want the answer. Damon hesitated. "Not good. She's 4 months behind on rent. The truck needs major repairs. No savings. And there's a Child Protective Services file. Someone reported the living conditions. A social worker is scheduled to inspect tomorrow." Rage burned so hot Adrian's chest hurt. His children, his blood living on the edge, Mara fighting alone. And he, a man who could buy silence and safety by the mile, hadn't even known they existed. "Where's the truck?" Adrian asked. "Corner of Atlantic and Court. She usually closes around 9. Adrian looked at his watch. 7:30. "Get the car ready," he said and ended the call. 4 years ago, he told himself letting Mara go was protection. He'd believed pushing her away was the only way to keep her alive. Now he understood the truth. He hadn't saved her from hell. He'd only shoved her into a different one and locked the door behind her. Quinn's kitchen sat like a lonely lighthouse on a quiet Brooklyn street, yellow light spilling through the service window into the night. Adrian parked a short distance away and watched. Inside, Mara moved with tired efficiency, wiping surfaces, stacking containers, counting something twice like she couldn't afford mistakes. Once she paused and pressed a hand to her lower back, the gesture small and automatic, like her body was always paying a price. At 8:45, Adrian got out. Every step toward the truck felt heavier than any walk he'd ever taken into a fight. Not because he feared Mara, because he didn't know where to begin. 4 years of absence didn't shrink with one apology. Mara's back was turned when he spoke. "We need to talk." She froze so completely the air seemed to lock around her. The spatula slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. Slowly, she turned. 4 years had etched worry into her face, faint lines near her eyes, sharpness along her cheekbones. But her green eyes were still bright with the kind of anger that had once terrified and thrilled him. "No," she said, voice flat as ice. "We don't. Mara, it's Miss Quinn to you." She bent to pick up the spatula, then turned away and scrubbed the cooking surface as if it had offended her. "If you came for food, we're closed." Adrian stepped closer until the scent of oil and sweat and that faint vanilla he remembered wrapped around him. "I saw them today," he said. "The stroller. 3 children." Mara's shoulders tightened. She didn't turn. "My children," Adrian corrected, voice rough. "They're mine, aren't they?" Silence stretched until it became its own kind of answer. Then Mara spun around so fast her chair scraped. Tears shone in her eyes, but her voice didn't soften. "My children," she said. "You don't get to claim them." Adrian didn't flinch at Mara's words, but they hit him harder than any threat ever had. "Mara," he tried again, softer. "Please." "Don't," she snapped, and the tears in her eyes hardened into something sharper. She stepped closer until she could jab a finger into the center of his chest. Her hand shook, rage, fear, memory, all of it tangled together. "You don't get to show up after 4 years and decide you're a father. You don't get to stroll into my life because you saw a stroller in the park and suddenly remember you had a heart." Adrian's throat tightened. "I didn't know." "What a luxury," she hissed, "to not know." Her voice rose, and the small food truck seemed to shrink around them. "Where were you when I was throwing up every morning and still had to work because if I didn't, we didn't eat? Where were you when I went to the hospital alone? Alone, Adrian. And they told me it was triplets and I felt my whole world crack in half." Adrian's mouth opened, but she didn't let him speak. "Where were you when I gave birth in a public hospital without insurance?" Mara's laugh broke like glass. I had an emergency C-section, 12 hours in recovery. I couldn't stand up by myself, and the nurse told me to stop crying because I was upsetting the babies. I was 23 and I had nobody. Adrian's hands curled into fists at his sides. Every word is carved deeper. Where were you when I had 3 newborns crying at the same time, and I couldn't even tell whose hunger was whose? She demanded, tears now spilling freely. Where were you when I worked 16 hours a day just to afford formula, when I had to decide between paying the electric bill or buying medicine because Theo had a fever? Theo. One of his sons had been sick and Adrian hadn't been there. He'd been living in silk and safety, convinced he'd done the right thing. Mara's breath hitched, then she swallowed the sound down like she refused to let him hear her break. And do you want to know the worst part? She whispered, stepping even closer. I found out I was pregnant 1 week after you looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing. Adrian's chest tightened so sharply he thought he might choke. 1 week after you called me a mistake. 1 week after you made me feel like I was dirty for loving you. I was carrying 3 of your children inside me while I was still bleeding from what you said. Adrian's voice came out hoarse. If I'd known... What? Mara cut in bitter. You would have married me, brought me into your world and introduced me as the waitress you used for comfort. Made your family accept me. She shook her head, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand like the tears were an inconvenience. We both know that would never have happened. Not then. Adrian stared at her, at the exhaustion and strength woven together in her posture. He hated himself with a clarity that was almost peaceful. You're right, he said. 4 years ago, I was a coward. Mara blinked, as if she hadn't expected him to admit it. I chose the easier thing, Adrian continued. I chose what I thought would keep you away from danger, and I'll let you pay the price alone. He drew a slow breath. But I'm not here to beg forgiveness. I'm here because I know a social worker is coming tomorrow, and I won't stand here and let anyone take those kids from you. Mara's face is drained of colour. You know about that? I know everything, Adrian said. The rent, the truck, the file. Her lips parted, and for a moment her anger faltered into raw panic. It lasted only a second before she forced it back behind steel. You don't get to fix this with money, she said, voice shaking. I'm not trying to buy you, Adrian replied. I'm trying to protect them. Protect you. Let me help. Mara stared at him, war in her eyes. Pride against fear, hate against love that refused to die. Finally, she turned away, gripping the counter until her knuckles whitened. I need to think. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no. Adrian swallowed, then spoke again, voice lower. More dangerous because of the truth in it. There were threats. Mara went still. 4 years ago, Adrian said, choosing each word like it could detonate. My family's enemies found out about you. They knew you mattered to me. Mara turned slowly. Her face looked carved from ice. What are you saying? They sent photos, Adrian continued. His jaw tightened until it ached. You are walking to work. You coming home. You sleep through your window. And the message said, if you want her kept intact, make sure she's no longer important. Mara's mouth opened, but no sound came. I had to make them believe you meant nothing, Adrian said, and for the first time she saw what he'd never allowed her to see before. Pain without armour, stripped down to the bone. The only way to keep you alive was to push you away hard enough that you wouldn't come back. Mara's laugh was bitter, broken. So you decided to play God with my life? You protected me by crushing me? I protected your body, Adrian whispered, and destroy your heart. She pressed a hand to her mouth as if she might be sick. Do you know what happened 1 week after you saved me? She asked, eyes bright with tears. I sat in the bathroom of the cheapest apartment I could afford, holding a pregnancy test with 2 red lines. 2 lines. And I thought about not keeping them, Mara admitted, voice hollow. I stood outside a clinic for an hour. I had no family, no money, and the man I loved had just told me I was a mistake. Adrian's knees went weak. For a mafia boss, for a man who'd stared down death and never blinked, the image of Mara alone outside that clinic was the thing that finally broke him. But then, I thought, Mara continued, tears sliding down her cheeks, these are my children. Even if their father hates me, they deserve to live. They deserve love. Adrian forced himself to breathe. You gave birth alone. Mara nodded once. Triplets, emergency C-section. My friend Jade Rivers was the only one there. Lila was underweight. She stayed in an incubator for weeks. Adrian closed his eyes. The weight of what he'd missed was unbearable. Why didn't you come looking for me? He asked, voice thick. Mara stared at him, like he'd asked something ridiculous. You told me you wanted me erased. Do you think I was going to crawl to your door and beg you to claim the babies? I might have been poor, Adrian, but I still had my dignity. Adrian opened his eyes and something in him settled. Not fear, not doubt, resolve. I can't change the past, he said quietly, but I can change the future. Mara's gaze narrowed. How? I'll pay the rent debt, fix the truck, and tomorrow I'll deal with the social worker, Adrian said. Then, after a beat, and there's a guest house in the Hamptons, separate, private, secure. You and the kids can stay there until this blows over. Mara's head snapped up. Move into your house? Are you insane? It's the safest way to prove stability, Adrian said. A safe home, security, a father present. No one can argue the kids are at risk. Mara's laugh had no humour. A father present, she repeated. You haven't even met them. You don't know Lila is afraid of the dark. You don't know Theo. She swallowed, eyes flashing. You don't know anything. Then give me the chance, Adrian said, and the plea in his voice was something he'd never offered anyone. This isn't about you forgiving me. It's about them staying with you. Mara looked away, jaw trembling. When she spoke again, her voice was exhausted to the bone. If I agree, she said, there are conditions. Adrian nodded instantly. Anything. This is temporary, Mara said. Only until I'm stable again. You don't control my life. You don't give orders. Adrian didn't blink. Agreed. And most importantly, Mara said, voice cracking, you don't get to make them love you and then disappear. Adrian's chest tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like an oath. I promise, he said, I will not leave them, and I will not leave you. Mara didn't say she believed him, but she didn't tell him to go, and that, for now, was the opening he'd spent his life earning. The next morning arrived too fast. Mara barely slept, her mind replaying Adrian's face in the truck, those grey eyes stripped of arrogance and filled with something that scared her more than anger, certainty. She kept telling herself she was doing this for the children, not for him, for Lila's fragile hope, for Theo's tight little guard dog heart, for Owen's need for routine that the world never seemed willing to respect. At 9 a.m, the doorbell rang. Mara opened the door with Owen on her hip, still warm and sleepy. Lila and Theo clung to her legs like they could feel danger through the floorboards. A woman in a grey suit stood in the hallway, a thick folder under her arm. Her expression was professional and serious. Miss Quinn, she said, I'm Elaine Porter, Child Protective Services. I'm here for the scheduled inspection. Mara forced her voice not to shake. Of course. But Elaine wasn't alone. Behind her, Mara's landlord, Hector Silva, stepped forward with a stack of papers and a face like stone. He didn't wait to be invited. 4 months. Hector said, not even looking at the kids. 4 months late. I've been patient. This is an eviction notice. 7 days. Mara felt the words hit her like a shove. Please, she blurted, tightening her hold on Owen. Just give me a little more time. I'm trying. I'll pay. You've been saying that, Hector cut in. I have a tenant ready to pay double. Elaine's pen moved across her notepad with a quiet, efficient scratch. Her eyes swept the cramped hallway, the worn carpet, the peeling paint near the baseboard. Not cruelly, but with a weight that made Mara want to scream. Miss Quinn, Elaine said, I understand hardship, but children need stability, a fixed and safe home. Her gaze flicked to the eviction notice. If you can't ensure that, I may have to intervene. No, Mara said sharply, the word bursting out. Owen began to whimper, sensing the tremor in her body. Theo stepped in front of Mara as far as his small size allowed, shoulders squared like a tiny soldier. Lila grabbed Mara's sleeve with both hands, wide grey eyes looking up as if asking what eviction meant. Mara's throat closed. Then a low voice cut through the hallway like a blade. Is there a problem here? Everyone turned. Adrian stood at the far end of the corridor, dressed in a flawless black suit like he'd stepped out of another world. His posture was calm, but it was the calm of a man who made rooms obey him without raising his voice. His eyes landed on Mara's face, tear-bright and pale, and something tightened in his jaw. Elaine straightened slightly. And you are? Adrian walked forward until he was beside Mara, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. Not touching, not claiming, just present. I'm Adrian Vale, he said clearly. The father of these children. Mara's breath caught so hard she nearly dropped Owen. Theo's head snapped up. Lila stared. Owen pressed his face into Mara's shoulder, overwhelmed by new voices and tension. Elaine raised an eyebrow. My file shows no father listed on the birth certificates. A mistake, Adrian replied. One I'm correcting. Hector scoffed. Touching doesn't change the fact she owes nearly $8,000 in rent. Adrian pulled out his phone as if he were ordering coffee. Damon. Yes, boss. Transfer $30,000 to Hector Silver's account. Right now. Hector blinked. What? Adrian looked at him with patient contempt. Your account number. Hector fumbled, gave it. His phone buzzed 5 minutes later. He stared at the screen like it had insulted him, then looked at Adrian with sudden fear, understanding dawning too late about what kind of man stood in his hallway. Right, Hector said quickly, voice changing. Yes, of course, no issue. Miss Quinn can stay. He shoved the eviction notice into his pocket and disappeared as fast as he'd come. Elaine remained. Her gaze moved from Adrian to Mara to the children, measuring not money this time, but intent. Financial resources are one thing, Elaine said carefully, but long-term safety is another. Your sudden appearance raises questions. We're moving today, Adrian said, to my guest house in the Hamptons. Secure property, plenty of space. You can inspect at any time. Elaine's expression softened a fraction, though her eyes stayed sharp. I'll need documentation of capability and a care plan within 48 hours. You'll have it, Adrian said. Elaine nodded once, then closed her folder. This is a positive development. When she left, the apartment felt too small to hold Mara's shaking. She turned on Adrian, clutching Owen tighter. You just said it, out loud, in front of them. Adrian met her. They deserve the truth. Theo stood rigid, watching Adrian as if trying to decide whether to bite. Lila, however, stepped forward, tiny and fearless in that way children sometimes are. She tilted her head up at Adrian, studying his face with serious concentration. Then she asked, soft and clear, Are you my daddy? Mara's whole body went cold. Adrian didn't answer with pride or swagger. He sank slowly to his knees, an expensive suit meeting the worn hallway floor without hesitation. His grey eyes shone. "Yes," he said, voice rough. "I'm your daddy." Lila's face broke into a smile so bright it was almost painful to witness. She opened her arms. "Pick me up, Daddy." One word, Daddy, hit Adrian like a wrecking ball. He lifted Lila carefully, like she was something sacred. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, and Adrian's mouth tightened as if he were biting back emotion he didn't know how to survive. Mara looked away, throat burning. This was what she'd feared. How quickly children could attach. How easily hope could grow. Theo didn't move closer, but his eyes stayed locked on Adrian, cataloguing everything. Owen wriggled in Mara's arms, overwhelmed. He pressed his hands over his ears when Lila squealed happily and made a distressed sound in the back of his throat. Mara bounced him gently, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay." Adrian's gaze flicked to Owen, and something subtle shifted, recognition that this child's needs were different, more fragile. He lowered his voice and softened the room. "Hi, Owen," he said quietly, not reaching, not forcing. "No loud sounds. I promise." Owen peeked through his fingers for a second, then hid again. Within an hour, bags were packed. There wasn't much. 3 battered suitcases and a couple trash bags filled with toys. Mara's whole life is reduced to a corner of plastic and worn fabric. Adrian's driver loaded everything without comment. Mara buckled the kids into car seats, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. On the drive out, Lila talked non-stop, delighted by everything she saw. Theo asked no questions, eyes watchful. Owen lined up his toy cars on his lap in a perfect row, repeating the motion until his breathing settled. When they arrived, Mara stopped at the doorway. The guest house was larger than every apartment she'd ever lived in combined. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Atlantic, endless blue. A marble kitchen, an oak staircase. Bedrooms upstairs, 3 of them, waiting like a dream she didn't trust. Mara stood frozen, afraid to touch anything. Behind her, Damon set down the suitcases. His gaze flicked over the kids and softened in a way that surprised her. Adrian stepped in last, sleeves rolled up now, jacket off, as if he was trying to become less intimidating by force of will. "The main bedroom connects to the 2 smaller rooms," he said gently. "You can keep the doors open at night. You'll hear them." Mara swallowed. "I need to talk to you. Alone." Adrian nodded. Damon led the children toward the back with careful calm. "Come on, Tim. Wanna see the pool?" Lila squealed. Theo hesitated, then followed. Owen resisted until Mara whispered that she'd be right there. Then he went, clutching his cars. When they were finally alone, Mara turned to Adrian, green eyes hard. "Lila called you Daddy, she said. She's waited 3 years for a father. Theo is trying to decide if you're safe. And Owen hates change. This place could break him if we're not careful." Adrian listened like every word mattered. Mara stepped closer, voice low and trembling. "They're starting to believe in you, Adrian, and that terrifies me more than anything." Adrian's expression tightened. "I'm not going anywhere." Mara shook her head. "Promises are easy." Adrian held her gaze. "Then watch my actions." Mara turned away and went upstairs to unpack, leaving Adrian alone in a palace of quiet with 3 battered suitcases and a trust he'd have to rebuild from the ground up. The first week in the Hamptons was chaos wrapped in luxury. Adrian Vale, who had once made grown men tremble with a glance, stood helplessly in a bright kitchen, while 3 3-year-olds turned his life into a series of humiliations. The first breakfast he attempted ended in blackened pancakes, smoke rolling toward the ceiling, and the fire alarm shrieking like a warning siren. Lila ran in circles screaming, convinced the house was burning down. Theo planted himself in front of Mara in a fierce, protective stance, jaw clenched like a miniature soldier. Owen dropped to the floor, hands clamped over his ears, rocking as the noise crashed into him like a storm. Mara spent 20 minutes calming Owen alone, whispering the same soothing words, until his breathing returned to normal. Adrian stood by the counter, staring at the ruined pancakes, with the stunned expression of a man who had just lost his first battle. "I've ended wars," he muttered, staring at the charred mess. "And I can't make breakfast." But Adrian wasn't the kind of man who quit. The next morning, he got up at 5, watched children's cooking videos on his phone like they were military strategy, and tried again. The pancakes were only half burnt. On the 3rd day, they were raw in the middle. On the 5th day, Lila took one bite, eyes widening, and squealed, "So good, Daddy!" Adrian turned his face away so she wouldn't see the wet shine in his eyes. He learned fast, because he had to. He learned that Lila wouldn't eat sandwiches unless they were cut into stars. He learned that Theo preferred his milk warmed to an exact temperature and would frown if it was too hot or too cold. He learned Owen's plate had to be blue, his spoon on the left, and nothing on the plate could touch anything else. Those details were the first clues that something about Owen was different. The boy rarely responded when someone called his name, but he turned instantly at the sound of a toy car rolling across the floor. He didn't like hugs, but he would sit near Adrian for hours if no one forced him to talk. He could count in multiple languages, then melt down from a sudden noise that seemed harmless to everyone else. One night, after the kids were asleep, Adrian asked Mara quietly, "What's going on with Owen?" Mara's expression tightened, not with shame, more like she'd been waiting for this moment. "He has developmental differences," she said carefully. "High-functioning autism. He's brilliant in some areas, but communication and sensory stuff, it's hard for him." Adrian held still. Mara watched him with a guarded intensity, like she was braced for disappointment. "A lot of people run when they hear that," she added, voice sharp. "I wanted to see what kind of man you were before I told you." Adrian's jaw flexed. Then he said, slow and absolute, "Owen is my son. There is nothing wrong with him. He just experiences the world differently." Mara blinked, caught off guard by the certainty. "If I need to learn his language," Adrian continued, "then I will learn it." From that night on, Adrian approached Owen the way he approached everything he cared about, with ruthless focus. He read books and watched specialists. He spoke to pediatric experts. He learned to warn Owen before transitioning. He learned to watch for the tiny signs of overload, the stiffening shoulders, the way Owen's fingers moved faster, the subtle change in breathing. He learned that sometimes the best way to connect was to sit beside his son in silence and let presence be enough. In the evenings, Adrian read stories to all 3 children. Lila loved princesses and castles. Theo loved superheroes and brave rescues. Owen loved books about numbers, cars, and patterns. Adrian did voices for each character, ridiculous voices, and discovered he liked it. He liked the weight of 3 small bodies leaning into him. He liked the smell of shampoo and toothpaste and the soft warmth of children who trusted him enough to fall asleep near him. Mara watched from a distance at first, suspicious and exhausted. She didn't stop him anymore. But she didn't soften either. Trust, for her, was a locked door with 4 deadbolts. Still, brick by brick, something changed. Theo stopped guarding Mara's bedroom door like a tiny sentinel. One night, Adrian caught him standing there and crouched to his level. "You don't have to do that," Adrian said gently. "I won't hurt your mum." Theo stared with those serious grey eyes. "Mum cried before, when she thought I was asleep." Adrian's chest squeezed. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry." Theo didn't accept apologies easily. He studied Adrian for a long moment, then nodded once. "Okay," Theo said, "but I'm still watching." Owen surprised everyone. He didn't hug Adrian. He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't even look Adrian in the eyes for long, but he began to move closer. If Adrian sat on the couch, Owen sat on the same couch, near, not touching, but close enough that only a small gap remained. If Adrian stood in the kitchen, Owen played in the nearest corner of the room. If Adrian read a book, Owen brought his own book and settled beside him like there were two planets in the same orbit. Mara noticed it first. One night she stood beside Adrian at the bedroom door, watching Owen fall asleep, curled near the spot where Adrian had been sitting. "Owen never does that with anyone," Mara whispered. "Not babysitters, not even Jade, only me." Her voice tightened. "And now you." Adrian stared at his son, throat burning. Owen hadn't said a single loving word, but he was saying it anyway, in the only language that belonged to him. 2 weeks in, Mara found Adrian alone on the balcony, staring out at the ocean like it was a question he couldn't solve. Moonlight laid silver across the waves. The wind moved through the trees with a hush that felt almost like peace. "You used to stand like this," Mara said softly, stepping out beside him. "Back then." Adrian turned. His grey eyes softened in the night. "I was thinking about you," he admitted. "How to keep you close without dragging you into darkness." He exhaled. "And then I failed." They stood in silence until Mara spoke again, voice quiet but steady. "I taught them Italian," she said. Adrian went still. "Why?" Mara stared at the sea, afraid to look at him. "Because I wanted them to know a piece of their father, even when you weren't there, even when I thought you hated me." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't give them your presence, but I could give them your language." Adrian stepped closer. Mara didn't step away. "You tried to hate me," Adrian said quietly. "I did," Mara admitted, tears gathering. "It would have been easier, but I couldn't hate you without hating a part of them." Adrian's hand hovered near her cheek, not touching until she didn't flinch. When his thumb brushed away a tear, Mara's breath hitched, not from fear, but from the shock of gentleness. Then the peace shattered. A sports car roared outside the gate the next morning, loud and aggressive. Adrian was in the kitchen, making breakfast when Damon appeared in the doorway, expression tight. "She forced her way past security," Damon said. "Your fiancé." Before Adrian could respond, Celeste Hawthorne strode into the guest house like she owned it, heels striking the floor like gunshots. "So this is where you've been hiding," she snapped, eyes sweeping the room with contempt. 2 weeks, no calls, no answers. I had to hire a private investigator to find my fiancé. Adrian's body shifted automatically, placing himself between Celeste and the staircase. "Leave," Adrian said, voice calm, lethal. Celeste's laugh was sharp. "Leave? We're 2 months from getting married." Her gaze slid past him, then stopped. Mara stood at the foot of the stairs with the children. Lila and Theo clutched her hands. Owen clung to her leg, hands pressed over his ears, as Celeste's voice stabbed the air. Celeste's face changed, angering shock to something like horror. "What is this?" she whispered. "Adrian, what is this?" Lila waved brightly, innocently. "Hi, do you want pancakes? Daddy makes really good pancakes." The word Daddy hit like a bullet. Celeste stumbled back. "You..." Her voice climbed into something shrill. "You have children?" Adrian's eyes turned to ice. "Don't raise your voice." Celeste pointed at Mara with shaking fury. "With her? Who is she? What are those—" "Never," Adrian cut in, stepping forward. "Call my children anything except their names." Celeste swallowed, fear flickering before pride returned. "Gideon will hear about this. Your family will hear. You'll lose everything for this." Mara trembled, instinctively pulling the children closer. This was the world she'd feared crashing down on them. Adrian moved closer to Celeste until she had to look up at him. "Tell whoever you want," he said softly. "But if you do anything anything to harm Mara or those kids. I will erase the Hawthorne name before your alliance even has the chance to break." Celeste went pale. She understood then. Adrian wasn't bluffing. She looked at the children, at Mara's protective posture, at Adrian's face. No longer polite, no longer performative. Then she turned and left. The click of her heels faded. The engine roared. Silence returned like a bruise. Mara's voice was barely a whisper. "The storm is coming." Adrian nodded once. "Then I'll end it." The storm arrived 2 days later. Mara's phone rang early. When she saw the name Elaine Porter, her blood turned cold. "Miss Quinn," Elaine said, voice heavier than before, "I need to meet with you and Mr. Vale immediately. There are new developments. I won't be coming alone." An hour later, Elaine arrived, with a police officer. She opened her folder and looked directly at Adrian. "We received an anonymous report about you. Alleged ties to organised crime. They claim the children are in danger because of threats connected to your life." Mara couldn't breathe. No. Elaine lifted a hand. "I have to investigate. Until then, I need proof these children are safe here." She paused. 24 hours. If you can't provide evidence that this environment is not a risk, I'll be forced to place Lila, Theo, and Owen into temporary custody." "No!" Mara surged up, shaking. "You can't take them!" Adrian caught her hands, grounding her. "Look at me," he said, voice still. "No one is taking our children." Mara sobbed. "Your family has power. What do we have?" Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "We have 24 hours, he said, "and I know exactly what to do." That night he told her the plan on the balcony, under a sky that felt too dark. "I'm cutting them off," Adrian said. "Completely. I'll renounce the inheritance. I'll sever ties publicly. I'll give the authorities what they need to end this, permanently. I'll move legitimate assets into a trust for the children. Everything clean. Everything is documented." Mara stared, stunned. "You're talking about giving up everything." Adrian looked toward the upstairs windows where his children slept. "My whole life is up there," he said quietly. 4 years ago, I chose cowardice. This time, I will choose you." Mara's voice turned hard with the need for proof. "Then, prove it. Stand in front of your family and choose us, where they can't pretend it didn't happen." Adrian nodded. "Tomorrow, Gideon will come." And he did. A convoy arrived in glossy black, and Gideon Vale stepped out like a king reclaiming territory. 75, silver-haired, grey-eyed, surrounded by bodyguards. Adrian waited at the gate without a tie, without the family symbols, just a mole ready to lose everything. "You've gone too far," Gideon said. "You are the heir. You have responsibility." "You reported me to child services," Adrian replied, calm and razor-edged. "That's your idea of family." Gideon's face hardened. "Those children are the result of a mistake. I can solve this quietly. Give the woman money, send her away. You return to your rightful life." Adrian laughed, cold. "I don't want it." Gideon narrowed his eyes. "Cross this line and you'll lose everything." "Then I'll have nothing but them," Adrian said. "And that's all I need." Gideon's mouth twisted. "From this moment, you are no longer a Vale." Adrian didn't hesitate. "I accept." Gideon turned and walked away, convoy rolling out like a retreat. From the guest house, Mara watched through tears. When Adrian returned, she stood at the door, eyes red, but there was a small, trembling smile on her mouth. For the first time, there was trust. The next morning, Elaine returned. Adrian placed a stack of documents on the table. Legal renunciation, severed ties, a comprehensive care plan, proof of legitimate finances, and a trust fund for the children. Elaine read, then looked up slowly, something like respect in her eyes. "In 20 years," she said, "I've never seen someone do this." She closed the folder. The file will be closed by the end of the week. When Elaine left, Mara sat very still, like she was afraid to move and break the miracle. Then she turned to Adrian, eyes shining. "It's over," she whispered. "No one can take them." Adrian lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "No one." And in the quiet that followed, without empires, without threats, without lies, what remained was the only thing that had ever mattered. A family, a second chance, and a man finally brave enough to deserve it.